Welcome to Watch, Review, Repeat. This is the podcast where two best friends discuss the latest in film and television and then do it all over again the following week. My name is Colton Brown. Joining me, as always, is Andrew Meadows. How's it going over there, Andrew?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Just finished up The Defenders. I'm excited to share my thoughts on it. Did you get it finished up?
Of course I did. We wouldn't be recording this podcast right now if I hadn't finished it. I, too, am excited to take a deep dive into Marvel's The Defenders. Now, for those of you who joined us last week, we talked a lot about all the Marvel Netflix shows that led up to The Defenders, and we might have gone a little overboard with how much we really tried to cover in a single episode. So for those of you who did listen all the way through, I really appreciate that. And for those of you who maybe tuned out halfway through, well, let's just say I understand. And I think hopefully this week we'll have a more focused episode for you guys to enjoy. So we're going to start with some news from the past week and covering both film and television. Andrew, I'll let you start.
They're coming out with an Obi Wan movie, man. They just announced it. And the Oscar-nominated filmmaker, Stephen Daldry, is supposed to be directing it. Which, to be completely honest with you, the only thing that I've ever seen by him is Billy Elliot. That's the only one I've ever seen. But I'm excited that they're covering Obi-Wan. That's enough for me.
Yeah, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say it's about damn time. You know, we've had this resurgence of Star Wars recently, obviously with The Force Awakens kind of kickstarting it, and we've got The Last Jedi coming out this December. We had Rogue One last December, and I think everyone and their mother had pretty much been expecting a solo Obi-Wan movie to happen at some point, and it's nice to see some confirmation on that front.
Yeah, man, and I hope they cast Ewan McGregor.
Okay, I was going to do you about that. So do we know if he's returning or not? Any word on that?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think they're in talks about it, but nothing's actually written in stone yet. I know there's no script or anything like that, according to the Hollywood Reporter who put out the original article. But I would hope that they would cast him. I don't know, he kind of embodies the character for me.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give to Ewan McGregor. There's nothing else you can do, right? There's no one else that can really take that role and really kind of do it the justice. I mean, you think about those Star Wars prequels, and if there's any one thing that you can point to within those movies that actually really works, it's Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because those movies have problems, and that's putting it mildly. But yeah, I mean, I've been happy with Lucasfilm's output on Star Wars so far. I think Last Jedi, from what we've seen, what we talked about last week, I think everything really is shaping up for this franchise. So I'm excited. I think that an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie has a ton of potential. I'm curious to see what time period they'll choose to set this in. And, you know, we're in such early stages just from what the article describes that I guess we really don't have a ton of details to go off of. But right now, just knowing it exists, knowing that they're really working on it, that's exciting.
I would think that they would probably take it after 3, before 4. You know what I mean? That period there where Luke's growing up on Tatooine and that whole thing where he's become known as the hermit in the desert. I think that would be a cool place to take it. But I don't know if there would. I mean, surely there would be enough content. They could draw up enough content for them to portray him during that period. So I don't know. I'm excited to see where they take it. But there's been a couple other developments this week in the news.
There sure has. Yeah. So on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Daniel Craig made an appearance and confirmed that he will be reprising the role of James Bond 007 in James Bond 25. Now, this was something that has kind of been, I guess, up for debate for a while of whether he would actually choose to return to the franchise. I think probably most famously after Spectre came out on the marketing tour for that, he kind of said that he'd rather kill himself before he went back and did 007. So either the paycheck has cleared and he's liking the numbers that he's seeing on it, or, I guess since Spectre's come out, he's taken a step back and said, being James Bond is pretty cool. Maybe it's worth one last go of it.
He's a great James Bond, though, man. I think he's my favorite Bond.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think that both of us have kind of grown up in the Daniel Craig era, if you want to put it that way. So yeah, I mean, for my money, I think Daniel Craig is probably my favorite Bond, and having had the chance to kind of explore some of the other Bonds now that I've appreciated his take on it. I mean, Sean Connery obviously is very much in the conversation.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's the quintessential classic Bond, but Daniel Craig, for me, kind of probably has the most personal connection, and Casino Royale is a movie that floors me every time I watch it.
Oh, it's fantastic. They're all, yeah, I mean, it's excellent.
Unfortunately, and this is not Craig's fault necessarily, but I feel like a lot of the movies that he's been in, well, I guess every Bond movie he's been in since Casino Royale has kind of not quite met the mark that I think that Casino Royale really kind of set.
Spectre was a beautiful movie.
Sure. I mean, I think Spectre was fine.
It did falter there at the end, though.
Spectre, for me, I agree. It's a beautifully shot movie. And Sam Mendes, who did Skyfall as well. I mean, clearly a very talented director. Very much got an eye for the directing, the technical aspects of it. But I think that in the case of Spectre more so than Skyfall, it just, it's not quite the complete package. There's things that I like about it. There's things that I don't like about it. And it's not quite to the level, I think, that Casino Royale set out. And then Quantum of Solace, which I like to liken as the downloadable content for Casino Royale, I think is the best way to put it. I mean, it works as a follow-up, very closely as a follow-up, and really probably the only true proper Bond sequel we've seen of now 24 movies that have been released. It works. There's things that worked about it, and there's things that really just don't. And I think that a lot of the movies since Casino Royale have really been plagued with that, where
they're not as strong as that first one.
Yeah, I wish they were able to maintain that level of quality. So, and hopefully Bond 25 will be kind of a return to form. So, I mean, there's really not much detail as far as what this movie will entail. We don't have any directors yet. We've got a few rumored ones. I know Christopher Nolan has been rumored to do it. I don't know that he will. It kind of seems like something that Christopher Nolan likes to do his own thing. I'd be surprised if he decided to really take on the Bond franchise.
God, what a ridiculous movie that would be.
Right?
Yeah, that would. I don't know, man.
So we'll see where this goes. I'm glad that Daniel Craig is coming back. So yeah, I'm excited about Bond. We'll probably be talking about it in the future as we kind of get some more details on Bond 25 coming out. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
But speaking of movie franchises, did you see what happened with the cruise missile on Mission Impossible 6?
Yeah, cruise missile. He's a madman. I mean, we're not even talking about Scientology here. He's just a madman in the sense that he's the guy that will climb on top of the Burj Khalifa just to do a damn movie stunt. So yeah, I guess it was about time for Tom Cruise to finally injure himself doing one of these ridiculous stunts. So I guess this is on the set of Mission Impossible 6. He was trying to jump from a building to another building and didn't quite clear the distance, I think, the way that he wanted to, and presumably the production crew wanted him to. So I guess he's been diagnosed with a broken ankle. One source says he might have possibly hurt his hip. It's not really any details on that, but I guess the big news story that's coming out of this right now, obviously, other than, Tom Cruise finally hurt himself, is we're looking at some sort of production hiatus for Mission Impossible 6. Now, the studio Paramount says they're still on track for a July 2018 release.
Supposed to be a 3-month delay, I think, in shooting is what I read. I think 3 months.
Yeah, and I guess it's tough because Tom Cruise is kind of your main character, and I think that really kind of complicates things when you're trying to film a movie. We'll see what happens here with this one. I'm excited about Mission Impossible 6.
Of course.
Mission Impossible is a franchise for me that has somehow gotten as good as it has. I mean, Mission Impossible 1, I'll give credit to it. It's a fun movie. 2, not so much.
What do you mean 2, not so much? They had a motorcycle battle. Who doesn't like motorcycle battles?
Mission Impossible 2 is too much for me.
Mask on mask on mask.
way too over the top. But, I mean, so 6 has Christopher McQuarrie, who is the director of the 5th one, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. He's coming back for this one, which marks the first in the franchise. And I've been a fan of his work. And I'm a big fan of the cruise missile. I say, all personal life quirks aside, I really enjoy Tom Cruise in a movie. So I'm excited to see what happens here. So hopefully they can get this thing on track sooner rather than later.
He was exceptional in the title of our podcast, Inspiration. Live, Die, Repeat.
Also known as The Edge of Tomorrow.
No, Live, Die, Repeat. That's the name of the movie.
Until Warner Brothers saw that their movie bombed and decided to do a last-ditch rebranding of it. But
what an incredible movie that was. I have to say, I think that's probably my favorite Tom Cruise movie. I think it is.
I mean, that's a bold declaration. I don't know if I'm willing to go that far.
What else would you say? What other movies do you? I mean, what do you think the best Tom Cruise movie is?
Oh, I don't know. It's probably got to be The Mummy, right?
I didn't see it. I saw the trailer.
Okay, I saw The Mummy. It wasn't his best work. Okay.
Was it 5 minutes of him screaming in that airplane?
No, they cut most of that out. It's the saddest part of that whole movie. Like, that's the one thing I looked forward to when I got into that theater. I guess. I mean, I would probably have to take a deeper look at his filmography before I make that determination as to whether that is the one. But it's up there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it shows a huge growth of character in that movie, man. They did an excellent job of watching a character grow. You know what I mean? He started off as an asshole, and then he ended up as a badass at the end of that movie.
I mean, I don't even know that I would say that he was an asshole. He was a coward at the beginning of that movie.
Yeah.
It does show a lot of growth, and it's a very non-typical role for him, and it's one that I particularly enjoyed him in. I think he did a great job in that. Yeah, so you recommended The Moon Star Goats last week. We're going to recommend you watch Edge of Tomorrow for any of our listeners right now.
Absolutely.
Also known as Live, Die, Repeat. It probably says both on the Blu-ray box, so just find one. It's probably the same movie. It's probably the movie we're talking about.
But speaking of badasses, did you see the Punisher trailer? Or teaser, I should say.
I did. So this is Marvel's The Punisher, starring John Bernthal, who we talked pretty extensively about last week, Frank Castle. In Daredevil Season 2, we got our first glimpse at The Punisher kind of becoming the character that a lot of people might recognize from the comics. You know, got a skull on his chest, toting a few guns, killing a few people that arguably deserve it. So we got our first look. This is coming to Netflix. Now, there's no release date just yet. I think most people are assuming that this is going to drop by the end of the year. I'm hoping for November. That would be a good time, I think, for this to come out. And we just got a brief glimpse at Frank Castle doing his thing. It doesn't show a whole lot. It shows that we'll definitely see some of Frank Castle's background. We can kind of see it looks like him in the military. I'm excited about this. I mean, he said for anyone that listened last week, both of us went on and on and on about the first arc between Matt Murdock, Daredevil, and Frank Castle, the Punisher, as the high point of not only Daredevil Season 2, but as the high point of really the entirety of the Marvel and Netflix collaboration. So I'm excited to see what this comes out with, and hopefully it does come out sooner rather than later, and we'll get a chance to really take a close look at this show this upcoming season.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. But it's a good segue into our main.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is something that did deliver, and that's Marvel's The Defenders, which dropped on Netflix on Friday, August 18th. So I mean, this is the team up of Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. We're finally seeing them come together in one big show to take on the biggest of the big bads. And that's the Hand, which is this big evil criminal organization that has infiltrated basically everywhere. And I'm curious to see, I guess rather to hear what your thoughts are on Marvel's The Defenders.
So there were high points of the series that I thought were they were tip top. They were really good, and there were things that I didn't quite like about the series.
And not to cut you off too much here, but I do want to iterate for our listeners. You know, Marvel's The Defenders takes place after all of the episodes of the other shows that we talked about last week. So this is seasons 1 and 2 of Daredevil, seasons 1 of Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. So naturally, we're going to be talking all the spoilers for those shows. The status quo for Marvel's The Defenders very much relies on all the events that took place in all those other shows. So,
would you say you'd have to watch the other shows to appreciate this one, though?
I would say some of them, yes. Daredevil, I think, is one that I think this show is very reliant upon. So I would say if you don't watch anything, Daredevil seasons 1 and 2 are probably essential. That said, I think it's something that you could watch on its own. I think it does work on its own merits, but it is, I would say, more so than something like The Avengers, the movie, which I think works kind of on its own merits, but benefits from watching all the other characters' movies prior to that. I think this one is a little bit more reliant upon the previous groundwork that has been laid by these other shows. So I would say in general, I would recommend watching some of these other shows, or at least having some passing familiarity with these characters, if nothing else, before you walk into the Defenders. But no, I think you could get away with watching it. And obviously neither of us is able to kind of bring a perspective to the table of how this show works if we haven't seen the other ones.
That's
I mean,
true.
we've obviously watched both. We've watched all these shows. We've expressed our opinions on those shows. So we're invested in these characters at this point to an extent. I mean, we bagged pretty hard on Iron Fist last week.
And he continues to get... If you're watching the Defenders to try to get more Iron Fist, I would say that you're going to fail, because it's simply not there. So many times during the season you think, oh, maybe it'll come out, maybe he'll just start kicking ass, but not really. Did he ever impress you?
Well, I would say that he didn't impress me, but I thought he was a lot more tolerable overall in this show than he was in his own show. And I think probably what that boils down to is he's a character that seems to play well with others, but he's not very compelling on his own.
And he's really the only one, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, you look at the other shows, Daredevil is a compelling show, Jessica Jones is a compelling show, Luke Cage is a compelling show for the most part. Iron Fist wasn't. And so it seems like the trends that the shows themselves, the individual seasons, the trends that those establish, it really seems like it's carried forward into the Defenders. So by that token, I think that Iron Fist doesn't really work a whole lot. And I guess probably kind of what sucks about that is this show really spends, not that it spends a lot of time, but it really makes the Iron Fist a pretty central focus.
Absolutely.
Just from the get-go. I mean, the first scene of the show is Iron Fist. And it kind of feels like an extension of that show. Honestly, I was a little worried when I watched that very first scene of the show. It's kind of poorly cut, poorly shot. It's a little dark, dimly lit.
And guess who's getting their ass kicked?
Yeah, guess who's getting their ass kicked? It's Danny Rand yet again, just getting his ass handed to him. And I'm like, maybe they're just leaning into the fact that we all know that his show sucked, and that he as a character wasn't terribly compelling, so they're just like, hey, we get it, we understand, we're gonna make a concerted effort to fix him here. And to some extent, I guess they kind of do. I mean, I think he's more tolerable here than he is his own show.
Well, I feel like they kind of played into it almost. Almost all the characters were written to, kind of plays into the fact that Danny's inexperienced.
I mean, he is inexperienced. I mean, we saw that in Iron Fist Season 1.
Right?
Like, the whole point of that show, and it took way too long to get to the point of that show, but what it was very much that Iron Fist sucks at what he does.
And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it.
Yeah.
And they kind of played into it, which it may have worked in Danny Rand's favor, to where... Okay, well, it's not just us viewing it as him as inexperienced and he's constantly getting his ass kicked and he doesn't know what he's doing. He's acting like a child. Everybody acknowledges that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I mean, there's a part, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, literally tells him to stop acting like a child. Like, that's literal dialogue from the show. So, again, it's something that I find frustrating because I don't know why they chose to use this iteration of Danny Rand. I mean, the Danny Rand from the comics that I enjoy, he's a goofball. He's kind of a dork. And there are elements of this show that really kind of lean into that, especially, I'd say, with his interactions with Luke. There are things that I see there that work, that kind of lean into this aspect of his personality. But too often do we find Danny Rand just brooding and very angsty. And I just don't think that's a good choice for his character. And not only for his character, but I just think that Finn Jones is a lot better at selling, the more fun side of Danny than he is trying to sell this, oh, I'm a badass, I'm going to take down the hand, this is my mission, I'm the immortal Iron Fist, this is what I was born to do. Like, it doesn't work for that. And I think it's a shame that they've really kind of crafted this character in such a way that they've leaned into that aspect so heavily. So I think we'll talk about a little bit more on Danny's development kind of throughout the show.
Not to sell the other interaction short, the other interactions were incredibly strong, especially between Jessica Jones and Matt Murdock.
Yeah, those two are a ton of fun together.
Yes, it was awesome. That was really strong.
Murdock, you grab me like that again, I'll punch you so hard you'll see.
Yeah, it was awesome. And that it was continuous throughout the entire series, you know what I mean? Or throughout the entire season, that, that the strong contrast between those two personalities, they interacted in a way that, I don't know, it was really refreshing, especially when it cut back to Danny Rand, you know what I mean? And it almost, like I said, it provided a contrast that was like, wow, those two interact on a different level, you know what I mean? They're really great to watch. And, it was, overall, I think the show was pretty good. One thing in particular that I did not like about the show was the cuts in between characters. And I thought that maybe once the characters, all joined together, I thought that maybe they would stop the hard cuts in between each section. But did you notice the cuts with the subway or the train, and then like pictures of the building, and then boom, you're at another character? Did you notice those hard cuts?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I didn't have an actual note here to talk about that, but it is something that stuck out in my mind, and I was very curious to see how you'd feel about that.
It aggravated me.
I agree with you. I didn't mind it in the first episode, because this is kind of before a lot of the characters have come together, and I didn't mind it so much because it felt like a very hard cut of, okay, this is someone else's life, we're going to do a hard cut to this other character's life. And I did think that it would go away once they did come together, but they did keep that as a very consistent style throughout the entirety of the show.
It's very jarring.
I think that thematically it would have made more sense once these characters kind of get to know each other, and once they start interacting a lot more than they did initially. I think that it would have been something that would have fit to get rid of that. But it is funny that you mentioned that, because I was wondering about that, and it's something that didn't totally work for me, but in the scheme of things, it's something that I think is pretty minor as far as the things that I did not enjoy about this show. One
thing I did enjoy, though, I enjoyed the color grading, the associations with certain colors, and especially in the first half of the season, it's very much apparent because everybody's kind of doing their own individual thing. Did you notice that?
Well, I think it'd be hard pressed to not notice it. Honestly, it's pretty heavy handed with its usage, and not to criticize it. I think it's obviously a very deliberate choice that the showrunners have made, and I enjoyed it because it did really kind of distinguish these characters, and I think it did a good job of really associating a certain color palette with each character. So, Daredevil has a very obvious red palette, is probably the most prominent color that we see with him.
That's right.
Jessica Jones has a very prominent blue color palette,
yep.
Which I gotta say works for her. And I'm glad it's not purple. She's now in a post-Kilgrave part of her life. So purple is a color that I think we can all understand Jessica Jones would like to stay as far away from as possible.
Danny had the green going on.
Which is good. And you mentioned the intro for Iron Fist last week as something you enjoyed. And I was kind of puzzled. And I'm like, I would have enjoyed this if it was in freaking green instead of blue. Like, why don't we just lean into the primary colors of these characters? And I'm glad that they did that here. And Luke Cage, last but not least, gets kind of a yellowish, a brownish kind of color palette.
Yeah, very warm. His color palette was very warm.
And all these styles, all these, the colors, it's very much in line with what we saw in their individual shows. And I think, at least as far as what episode 1 is concerned, I really enjoyed that in terms of kind of establishing these as their separate characters and their separate lives, and they kind of emulated the visual identities that a lot of these individual shows brought to the table. And I think that was really cool. Episode 1 in particular just kind of felt like, here's like a 13-minute vignette of each character.
Right.
And I enjoyed that. And then, as we kind of bring these characters together,
it starts to blend.
I guess the end of episode 1, there's you see all these colors kind of starting to merge together in a particular sequence, and it really kind of signals, the beginning of the need for these characters to come together.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that aspect very much. But the cuts really pulled me out, man. I have to admit, they pulled me out of every I'd get involved and then boom, cut. And it's like, fuck, I don't want to watch another cut.
Yeah, it was a little distracting. I guess for me, it was one of those things, maybe I just got used to it, or...
Well, in the later episodes, the content was so strong in the later episodes, and that's one thing about this show. As the show progresses, you get distracted by everything because the content gets much more meaty. And it really... I don't know, it tugged at some strings there in the later episodes that were, I don't know, it progressed very well. I really enjoyed the differences in the characters and stuff, and they played off of each other very strong.
I mean, I think if there's one thing that I would like to highlight for this show is the character interactions, because all these characters just bounce off each other beautifully. Even Danny the dumbass Rand. Mm-hmm. He's even someone that when he's interacting with these other characters, like he's almost an enjoyable presence.
That's true.
But I mean, a lot of these characters have just general chemistry. We saw Luke Cage and Jessica Jones season 1, and those two clearly had some chemistry, both in and out of the bedroom.
Right.
And I would say that tension is still very much present within this show, even though Luke Cage has himself another nice lady. And these characters are so much fun. And it's not even just the principal characters, too. Like, honestly, for me, there's a lot of joy in watching the Daughters of the Dragon, freaking Misty Knight and Colleen Wing colliding. Like, just seeing those two in the same room. Like, I'm a comic nerd, so just seeing these characters, I know their comics history, and obviously there's certain things that don't get translated to the screen, and there's certain things that never will, but just seeing two characters like that are so heavily tied together in the mythos of the comic books, just seeing them in the same room, thinking about the possibilities that lay in wait for these characters going forward. Like, it's super exciting to see these guys interacting.
One of my favorite things that that I enjoyed watching every next episode, I should say, was the intro sequence too. I thought the intro sequence was great. The art and everything else, I thought it was. I enjoyed the intro sequence for Iron Fist. I thought it was cool. And this intro sequence is a little bit more artistic, I would probably say. And it's I don't know, it's cool. I thought the intro sequence was great.
I agree. I think it's one of the strongest intro sequences we've gotten for any of these Marvel Netflix shows. I guess probably coming into this, my favorite of any of the 4 that we had seen prior to this was Daredevil. And I think that a lot of the intro sequences for most of the shows, I would argue with the exception of Iron Fist, really kind of somewhat explore the thematic content of what those shows entail. I mean, Daredevil, the way it kind of visualizes a lot of these, it got the wax/blood type thing dripping down.
Which is almost like a Catholic candle or whatever.
Kind of. It shows these figures taking shape kind of in the way that Matt, the way he sees. I mean, he's blind, but he still sees. He has these images that form in his mind based on the sounds and based on these figures taking shape. And that's, I feel the intro kind of visualizes similarly to how he sees Jessica Jones. We see a lot of quick cuts and it kind of shows the voyeuristic nature of her PI job within the intro sequence. And then in Luke Cage, we have Luke kind of interlaced with these images of Harlem, which is, as we see in this show too, in The Defenders, it's so integral to his identity, how much he identifies with his city and what lengths he'll go to really kind of protect not only the city but the people within it. And then Iron Fist is just kind of...
It's the Iron Fist that we want, right?
It's not, though. It's not. Because he's not using his fucking Iron Fist within the... Like, it's a show called Iron Fist, and the intro is this random asshole silhouette just kicking around. And it's not anything that would even show you what the show is. I mean, in some ways it is. It does show you exactly what the show is. It's a show that about a guy called the Iron Fist that doesn't use his Iron Fist at all.
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed it, though. It was cool, He
100% disagree. Garbage. Absolute garbage. Whatever. That's a debate for another time. I will agree with you. The intro here is phenomenal.
I think it's great. It's great, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's probably closest to kind of what Luke Cage did. I mean, it's got these characters with these primary colors that we kind of talked about that they used in the color grading of the show, and it kind of shows maps of New York within these silhouettes within these colors.
Yeah.
And the intro is. I really, really enjoyed it, and not just the visuals of it, but I actually thought the actual soundtrack of it was very cool. It's kind of a little bit more of a downtrodden piece, but it's a beautiful piece, I thought, and it's something that hopefully we'll see a Defenders season 2, so we get to see it again.
Can we get into spoilers now?
Well, I guess before we get into spoilers, there's a couple other things I want to touch on. I think we find a lot of these characters at the beginning of the show in pretty interesting places, particularly Daredevil. And I would argue that this show really is a Daredevil season 2.5.
Oh, I'd agree with you 100%.
He's the one I think that gets the biggest growth throughout and the biggest arc to kind of develop from. And when we see him at the beginning of this show, I mean, he's made a conscious decision to not be Daredevil anymore. And I think that's an interesting response to kind of what we saw from the end of Daredevil Season 2, or really the entirety of Daredevil Season 2, which is a season where he struggles with his identity of trying to balance his personal life as Matt Murdock and trying to balance his vigilante life of Daredevil. And we've seen now that he kind of is trying to make a deliberate effort to be the Matt Murdock, to be the influence that he can be. I mean, we see him trying to actually be a lawyer again, which is something that he very much neglected in Season 2.
And he succeeds at it.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to see him actually, try to do something other than being Daredevil and be successful at it. So it's interesting to see him kind of grappling with his struggles of identity. And like I said, since this is kind of almost a Daredevil season 2.5, I think that he's the one that experiences the most growth since we've seen them. I mean, we see Jessica Jones, and literally her apartment has not been changed since Daredevil season 1, which technically, was released almost 2 years ago. And I don't know exactly how it fits within the timeline, but it kind of seems like Jessica Jones has kind of not done anything since we've seen her on screen last.
That's right.
I guess if any character is going to, not fix her apartment because she's too lazy to deal with that bullshit, it would 100% be Jessica Jones. So on one hand, I kind of get it, but it does seem like she hasn't really done a whole lot since we've seen her on screen. Whereas someone like Luke Cage, we saw at the end of season 1, he gets sent back to prison, and it seems like they kind of glossed over that. I mean, I think it was a little disappointing. I thought there would be a little bit more groundwork to be laid to kind of make these characters kind of fit together in the way that we see here, but it doesn't. Again, it's not something for me that's a big deal. But I just thought it would be interesting to see Luke in another life that versus kind of what we see in Luke Cage season 1.
I thought about that. I consciously thought about it whenever the episode 1 was going on. If you know that this guy has superhuman strength and he's bulletproof, would you stick him in a regular prison to serve out his time? If I can break handcuffs, if I can rip my cell apart, if I could walk through the door, then wouldn't you want to stick me in another prison? Like I said, it was one of those things that was kind of not necessarily jarring, but I just kind of, I don't know. It didn't settle well with me. A lot of the beginning of this series did not settle well with me until it started going. You know what I mean? Until, I'd say probably episode 2 or 3. Until then, I was kind of, I don't know. I didn't necessarily enjoy it until then.
I mean, I'm a sucker. I enjoyed it from minute 1. I had my issues with it, but I think that I did enjoy it. And part of it for me was it's nice to just pick up with these characters. Like I said, I think it's a little odd that they kind of glossed over certain aspects of particularly Luke Cage's struggle, the predicament that we see him in at the season 1. Like they kind of just said, we don't want to deal with that right now, and just kind of brought him back into the fold.
Right.
And I don't think that's really necessarily a satisfying resolution to it. But for a show that is 8 episodes long, kind of understand the kind of want and need to pull him back.
And I thought that played in the show's favor as well. I thought the 8 episode arc was short, it was concise, and it got what it needed to get done.
Yeah, and we've talked about that last week. Is the pacing for a lot of these shows was kind of what bogged down a lot of them, and by having 8 episodes here, I think that was a good way to counteract some of the issues we found. I think that the 8 episodes overall did a good job of here's where everyone is in their life. Let's bring them together, and then we'll get it to the denouement, and then we'll kind of set the stage for all these other characters going forward. And I want to say that I really enjoyed this show, but I think it's good, and I don't think it's great. And I also think that this is a show that going into, I was very excited for. 3 out of 4 shows prior to this, I really, really enjoyed. To varying levels, obviously, but there was a lot of aspects of those shows, and even Iron Fist. There's certain things in that I did enjoy, not much, but Yeah, say anytime I get a chance to take a dig at Iron Fist, I got to take it, right? Sorry, you're getting me. You're distracting me here. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is that I think for anyone that didn't care or didn't particularly enjoy any of the other Netflix shows, I don't think this show is going to change your mind. I don't think there's anything in here. I mean, it's very similar.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that.
In style and tone and feel to these other Netflix shows that came before it. So if you didn't enjoy those, I would stay away. It's not gonna change your mind.
But if you enjoyed any one of the other characters, it's worth watching. Because those relationships between your favorite character and another is guaranteed to grow. So if you enjoyed Daredevil, and that's the only one you enjoyed, watch it. If you enjoyed Jessica Jones, watch it. Or Luke Cage, watch it. And if you are one of the few people that like the Iron Fist, well, watch it because you get more Iron Fist.
You get a lot more Iron Fist. More than we needed.
Right, I would agree. But I mean, my thoughts on the show were almost like Daredevil Season 2. The high points far superseded the low points. You know what I mean? There were things that I didn't enjoy about the show, but the high points made me almost completely forget about them. Because the high points were just worth watching. And not necessarily from an action aspect, because I thought the choreography was mediocre at best. I didn't really get anything from that, but the parts that I enjoyed were the character interaction and just the growth of each individual character. There were parts in this season that were very compelling, and they were emotional, and they were raw, and they were good. But like I said, that's my take on it is it's worth watching if you enjoyed any of the other characters and you want to watch those characters grow and develop. It's definitely worth watching. And I wouldn't watch it for ass kicking or anything else other than wanting to watch the characters that you enjoyed in previous seasons grow.
Just to piggyback off that, I mean, yeah, I think that's very fair. And I think that we owe credit to Charlie Cox, Kristen Ritter, Mike Coulter, and I guess Ben Jones, if you want to lump them in there. I think these three and a half really bring something to the table to elevate these characters. And I think it's so much fun to see these characters together that I hope that going forward we get to see these characters interact a lot more and not just having to wait until this team up happens. You know, we can't use the excuse that they don't know each other anymore. So I hope that we get more in this vein, because I think that these principal characters of Matt Murdock, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, they're so much fun together that I really enjoyed what we got here. So I guess it's about time we get into spoiler territory. Does that sound good to you?
It sounds good to me, man.
All right, so full spoilers from Marvel's The Defenders from here on out. If you have not watched Marvel's The Defenders, I would recommend you do so before you listen to the segment, but you are your own person, and I respect the decisions that you make. So I guess the first thing I would like to talk about is the antagonists of the show, the Hand.
And their possible lack of development, or...
Yeah. I think that these, it's frustrating because we've seen antagonists in these individual shows that just absolutely are phenomenal. I mean, Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk, David Tennant's Kilgrave, Mahershala Ali's Cottonmouth. The Hand, in general, I just don't think that they're a terribly compelling villain overall. I feel almost bad because I think Sigourney Weaver, who plays Alexandra, who is the head of the Hand, I think what she does bring to the table, she does well with. I mean, she's got this very simple elegance to her character, but that's it.
That's it. That's as far as it goes. I can't remember now. You'll have to correct me, but I don't remember her from did she come out in season 2 of Daredevil or
No. This is her first introduction. I mean, we've seen the Hand as an organization slightly in Daredevil season 1, most prominently though in Daredevil seasons 2 and Iron Fist. We've seen various facets of the Hand. I guess fingers of the Hand. I guess as it's explained within this show. So I guess Daredevil season 1, we see Madame Gao, who is working the heroin trade under Kingpin's organization or whatever he's trying to foster.
And she's personally my favorite.
Oh, definitely. And then Daredevil season 1, we also see Nobu, who, as we learn within Daredevil season 2, is an undead ninja, and he's working under Murakami. And in Iron Fist season 1, we see Bakuto.
I enjoyed Bakuto to a certain extent.
So I guess the one thing that I'm glad that this show reconciled is that up until this point, we've seen like everyone and their mother basically seems to claim that they're part of the Hand. It's kind of just like, well, who is the Hand? Like, what are these guys like? What are they doing? What's their purpose? I don't understand it. The Hand is a pretty big organization with the comics, but it seems like every show within the Netflix universe is kind of taking their own spin on it and not really in a way that seems consistent with the other shows.
Right.
And I think this show did a pretty good job of at least reconciling the fact that, there's 5 fingers of the Hand. There's Alexandra, there's Madame Gao from Daredevil, there's Murakami, who's responsible for elements that we've seen in Daredevil, there's Bakuto, we see in Iron Fist, and there's Sawande, who is new to this point, but, you need a 5th finger of the Hand, so I guess it makes sense to bring someone else in. And it kind of brings all these elements together in a way that, okay, here's these different parts of this organization, and they originated from Kunlun, the place that Iron Fist himself was trained for his 15, 20 years to become the Iron Fist. And I enjoyed that. Well, that's probably one of the few things I did like about, I guess, the Hand in general, is that they finally found a way to explain what the hell is going on with these guys. What I didn't like is that they didn't feel like they didn't really feel like a threatening villain, I guess, throughout most of the show. There's a lot of scenes dedicated to these guys basically fighting each other within the constraints of the Hand and saying that, you suck at what you're doing, I should take over, I should be the leader. And it's just like, what are these guys even trying to do in the first place?
Right? How did they get to the point where they're at, fighting amongst themselves the way they are?
Right. And we get elements of their history. These guys have been around for centuries, if not more. And they're dedicated to life itself, but it's such a generic, vague motivation. I guess they're, I on one hand, I understand they're about maintaining immortality, but in terms of her central goal of anything else that they do, I mean, they've threaded their ways into businesses across the world. I mean, we see this in Iron Fist season 1. They've rooted themselves in Rand Corporation. It's just like, to what end? It just doesn't seem like they have an actual goal other than we want to be around forever. And it's just kind of like, well, okay, so you're around forever. You figured out a way to keep yourselves alive or resurrect yourselves, as it turns out. And it's just like, what are you trying to do?
And there's nothing there.
Yeah, I guess that's probably my biggest issue with the show, is that the villains just aren't terribly compelling. It's not to discredit the efforts that a lot of these guys put into it. I just think that overall they just kind of exist to be cannon fodder for our heroes to fight against.
And very much, this is where kind of the Daredevil 2.5 kind of takes on that role. You know what I mean? Where the show does have these big bads, right? You got the Hand, but the show's almost completely revolves around Daredevil and Elektra's relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's something that is good or bad, or depending on your perspective. I mean, I guess I'm one of the people that I really, really, really enjoyed the relationship between Daredevil and Elektra in season 2, and I guess I'm biased because I think that she's a very compelling character from the comic books, and to see her translated and not exactly in a perfect way from the comic books, but I think the iteration that we saw of her in Daredevil season 2, I thought was very compelling. I mean, I thought her Elodie Young, what she brings to the table, I really liked, and yeah, I mean, this show totally revolves around Daredevil Elektra. And yeah, I said I think Elektra herself as a villain, as an antagonist within this show, was something that I guess I enjoyed as an extension of what I enjoyed in season 2. It was the everything else with the antagonist for me that I didn't enjoy, but I don't know if you feel the same way.
No, I would completely agree. Like, you could take out, if you would have had the hand manipulating Elektra for the entirety of the season, I'd have been okay with it. And then if we got more of the hand in season 2 of the Defenders, I'd be okay with that. You know what I mean?
Well, be careful what you wish for. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of hoping at this point on, the hand is in the rearview mirror. I hope that we see some different threats going forward, because, and it's not just constricted to the Defenders itself, but I think where Daredevil season 2 probably kind of lacked was with the hand, and it was kind of one of those things where we didn't really know the full extent of their going-ons within Daredevil season 2, and we got a little bit more of that here.
But now that you found out about the hand, it's not that
it wasn't totally compelling the way I kind of hoped it might be, and that's one of those things. I think that the nature of this being 8 episodes alone kind of helped. Not just in sense of the pacing overall, but just in the sense of kind of disguising maybe the lack of, I guess, how compelling these villains probably could have been.
I gotcha. Yeah, sure.
I think there could have been more than what they brought to the table here.
I would say the first high point of the show, though, for me anyways, was when Luke Cage met Danny. Danny's in the basement of some building, and they're melting these bodies down with some acid, and they find out that the Hand's essentially hired, street level criminals to take care of their dirty work, and Danny gets in on it and finds out what's going on. And they go to this place, and they're taking care of these bodies, and Danny and his lady friend, they hop in there, and they try to take care of these guys, and Luke Cage steps in to protect one of these low-life criminals that he personally knows, that he's trying to set straight down the straight and narrow, and he essentially protects him from Danny. And I thought that first encounter was pretty cool. I enjoyed it, especially when he summons the Iron Fist and punches him in the face. I thought, yeah, this season we're gonna get a lot of Danny Rand kicking ass, which it didn't really pan out, but he did punch Luke Cage in the face, and it was I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I guess it kind of ties into what we talk about in our non-spoiler section, is that these characters interacting, like that's I think where this show shines. So, when we see Danny and Luke Cage start interacting, and they kind of have a little bit of a tussle before they kind of get well acquainted with each other. Like it's really kind of cool to see these characters colliding, and it's kind of refreshing also to see that Danny learned that he can use his Iron Fist to do things with, instead of just breaking out of doors, because just kind of what he did in the entirety of his own show, it seemed like. That's where this show really works. There's a lot of moments of just these characters coming together and just doing things that, you always wanted them to do, but they've always been kind of limited by the constraints of kind of, well, really, I guess, the production. It's one of those things where, like, you'd love to see Matt Murdock just walk down an alley in Hell's Kitchen, and Jessica Jones just kind of sees him, is like, hey, what's up? What's going on with that guy? And, he never really afforded that opportunity, because, of course, Charlie Cox is going to show up and just do 2 days of filming on that. So you kind of have to wait for this big team-up collaboration for these guys to interact. And seeing those two interact, seeing Luke Cage and Iron Fist kind of develop maybe somewhat of a bromance. I'd love to see it. Some of us may know that Heroes for Hire, it was a comic book that they put together back in, I guess, 70s, 80s, when both Luke Cage and Iron Fist individual comics were struggling a bit. They decided, why don't we just put these characters together and see what happens? And that's really kind of created a big history for those characters going forward, where those two are BFFs forever.
Well, Luke Cage is looking for a job, man.
Yeah, well, as I said, there's a lot of little things in this show that point towards a lot of really fascinating, really cool things that I would as a comic book fan, love to see going forward in some of these shows. And I guess, in case in point being Luke Cage and Iron Fist, like those two characters, some of their actions are really fun together. And I can kind of see the potential. I mean, these guys are obviously at the beginning of their relationship where, Danny's talking about, oh, yeah, I punched this dragon to get the Iron Fist. And Luke Cage is like, what the fuck are you talking about?
That sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun interactions between those two particular and all the characters in general where I'm just like, this is what I've been waiting for. This is what has, like, I can push aside my issues with the antagonists and other issues I have with the show, because honestly, it's just too much fun seeing these people in the same room. Like, I want to see this going forward. And not that the shows can't be compelling on their own, but I think certain characters really kind of mesh together. Luke Cage and Iron Fist have had such a intrinsic history together in the comics. I think it'd almost be a shame to not bring them together going forward. To some extent, and it's not that Luke Cage and Iron Fist can have their separate shows together, but I would like to see those two particularly interacting. And
I feel like especially Iron Fist, he would benefit greatly from having another strong supporting actor.
I agree. I think maybe Iron Fist would be best off not dealing with his own bullshit, unless they can fix his bullshit going forward.
I don't know. Now this season had a couple of holy shit moments for me. What was your first one? What was your first one where you're like, holy shit?
I guess holy shit, and I'm coming from the perspective of, a pretty big comic book fan, seeing a lot of these characters in a very different medium. And obviously we've both watched these Netflix shows, so I've kind of gotten used to seeing these versions of these characters. But I guess the holy shit moments for me in general, I guess episode 3 has got to be the first one, where all these guys come together at this Midland Circle building where the hand is concentrated, and they all kind of start interacting for the first time and start to beat the shit out of people. Like, that was probably the first big holy shit moment for me.
Well, my first holy shit moment, Stick, Matt Murdock's teacher. He's bound and he's held hostage by the hand, okay? And Elektra's there, and everybody else is there, and Alexandra's there, and Stick's bound on this pole. Well, anyways, he ends up chopping his hand off to escape. And they pan to his hand just sitting there on the floor bleeding, and he escapes. That was my first holy shit moment. Was, damn, that dude just chopped off his hand and he left.
He was very nonchalant about it too.
Yeah, he don't care about his hand. He's gone. But within that same episode too, it was a really strong episode because you got Stick chopping off his hand, which was just kind of mind-blowing. It was kind of crazy. But then you really get the first strong interaction between probably my two favorite characters of the whole season, which Matt actually goes and gets Jessica Jones out of jail, if I'm not mistaken. He goes there and he gets her out of jail, and you get the first interaction between those two characters, and they contrast really well. You got Jessica Jones, who's just melancholy about everything. She just doesn't give a shit. And then you have Matt Murdock, who's just bound by his own morals and very serious, and I don't know. They bounced off each other really well, and then the episode ended with them all coming together up at the top floor of this massive building and saving Danny Rand. And then Daredevil dons his suit in episode 5, and I don't know if they changed the suit between the seasons or not, but the suit looked really good.
Yeah. We saw, Daredevil kind of modified his costume in season 2. He kind of gets shot in the head by Punisher,
right?
Which kind of necessitates him getting a little bit of an upgrade in the suit, and they molded this mask that really fits Charlie Cox's face a lot better than what we saw towards the end of, or I guess, the last episode of season 1 of Daredevil. And now that we've got this version of Daredevil with full costume, it's so satisfying to see him put on the suit. And there's like a moment, I think, in episode 5 where Jessica Jones finds herself in a little bit of trouble, and Daredevil just shows up in full fucking costume.
Oh yeah,
and just start beating the shit out of the people, and I'm like, this is what I'm here for.
Yeah, it was cool, man.
It's kind of what I love seeing Daredevil in his costume, and I think that what they did for his costume in season 2 going forward. I don't know if they changed anything from season 2 to the Defenders. It looks similar, but it's just so satisfying to see him in costume, and it does make me kind of wish that some of these characters, looking at you, Danny Rand, would put on a costume too, because I think it would be, from my perspective as someone that just likes seeing these guys like put up on the big screen from where they are in the comic books, like it'd be super satisfying to see these guys in full costume. And to an extent, I mean, Luke Cage is a guy that just kind of shows up in pants and a yellow shirt, and that's his comic book costume. And
hey, it works.
And Jessica Jones is also kind of one of those characters that doesn't really give a shit, even in the comics, and she's just kind of, she's got these powers, obviously, but her costumed history in the comics, shall we say, did not go so well, and so I can kind of see, especially with the personality that they've kind of given her in this show, like she's not a character that's going to suit up in the way that maybe Daredevil and Danny Rand as Iron Fist might do.
And they almost do it out of necessity too, though. You know what I mean? They're the most vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, Danny Rand's a billionaire. He's got to protect his identity, and he's also have to have stuntmen in his show that would disguise the fact that Finn Jones doesn't know how to fight people. You know, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea of just floating it out there, Netflix, if you're listening.
And I think probably why the suit looks so good is maybe because he's in more light than he normally is in. It seems like he was just more visible than he was in, Daredevil season 1 and 2, just because he's not fighting people during. I guess he's fighting people during the night, but it seems like they lightened up the color palette because of the other characters. You know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. I like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen season 1 or 2 of Daredevil, but the suit seemed to really stand out, and it may be due to the contrast because nobody else wears a suit. I don't know, but another moment that really stuck out was Daredevil and Jessica Jones go to the daughter of they go to the home of one of the architects that built the Hands headquarters, and they try to get more information, and Jessica Jones just whips out this information about Matt Murdock, and she says, "Listen, I've got a friend whose dad was a boxer, and this, that, and the other," and I was just like, "Oh, holy shit!"
Yeah.
That kind of hit kind of hard, and it kind of hit out of nowhere too. But you got Charlie Cox reacting to it in a way that's just, it's hitting a nerve with him or with his character, and Jessica Jones is telling it in a way to where, yeah, I don't really give a shit, but I know, and I kind of really do give a shit because, I am this person that does care, but I don't really want to give it off. You know what I mean? And I don't know. That moment right there is the first moment that I actually had real emotional, just a real emotional contact with all the characters and the interaction between the both of them. And it gets expanded on. It gets expanded on at the end of the season, but that was probably the first strong moment of, ooh, there's something more here than just watching these people kick ass.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually didn't even have that in my notes as like a moment that really stuck out to me, but it is something that, yeah, I would agree. I mean, full credit to Charlie Cox and Kristen Ritter. Those two, even when they're just shooting off one-liners at each other, like they're entertaining, but
they're strong comedic relief when they need to be, but then they're strong dramatic relief when they need to be too.
You point to this moment, and yeah, I mean, there is a very surprising emotional connection between those two. I mean, we've seen Jessica Jones vulnerable with Mike Coulter's Luke Cage, but it is kind of surprising to see her in this light with someone like Matt Murdock. Yeah, I mean, it is emotional. It's an emotional scene to kind of see those two really kind of, in a way, understand each other. I mean, they're people from very different backgrounds that have very different lives.
And up until that point, they were very standoffish with each other. So it's the first point that where she really exposes herself to where, hey, listen, I really care about Matt Murdock. You know what I mean? I've looked into him. I sympathize with him, and there's something more there. You know what I mean? And at that point, you realize that there's a much deeper connection between all the characters, not just Jessica Jones and Matt Murdock, but it really exposes a little bit more to each character. And then that's followed up by the ending of episode 6 where Elektra stabs Alexandra in the back, which was, I definitely did not see that coming.
No, yeah, me neither. That was a plot twist.
Yeah, I like I said, I didn't see it coming. I was like, oh, that was another holy shit moment.
I mean, basically, because up until this point, Elektra is following the Bucky Barnes Winter Soldier arc of Captain America up until this point where, this is a character that has been brought back from presumably the dead, or, in the case of Bucky Barnes, maybe he didn't quite die, but they've been kind of used for their own means and brainwashed into thinking that this is what you are here to do. And so Elektra, as the Black Sky, which I guess is the ultimate living weapon, I guess, she's been kind of brainwashed into thinking, oh, you're going to serve her bidding. This is what this is what you've been reborn to do. And then she just kind of by episode 6, she's kind of gotten these memories of her past life as Elektra Natchios and her past life with Matt Murdock as a lover and as Stick as a mentor. And in episode 6, she's just...
Fuck these people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if she's quite at the point where she is totally recognizant of her past life, but she takes charge. And
in a big way.
In a big way. She says, all right, it's time for me to lead this organization, and she just straight up kills Alexandra, Sigourney Weaver's character, and it's kind of just it was definitely a shocking moment, and one for me that on one hand I was happy to see Elektra kind of step up and feel like, okay, that's surprising. I'm glad that they didn't go to the most tropiest way that they could do with her kind of redeeming herself by the end of the show. I mean, that seemed like it was kind of where it was heading,
right?
Instead, it kind of leaned into, no, we're going to make her into something else. And it makes sense because she is something else. She's not Elektra. She's a version of Elektra, perhaps, but she's clearly got some issues. So seeing her kind of take charge, it was definitely a moment where I was just like, okay, I don't know everything. Because up until this point, I'm just like, okay, they've got all the supporting characters in a police room. Those guys are going to get kidnapped at some point.
Right.
It did subvert my expectations to an extent, which I enjoyed. It's nice to not know how everything's going to play out.
Which, that kind of leads me into my next point, though. I thought it was a clever way to handle the next part of the season where they put all the supporting characters and all the supporting characters from all the major characters. They put them all in the police precinct, right? And it's out of protection for those people. And then all of a sudden we find all the major characters in the precinct because they've been captured. And I thought it was an interesting, I guess, dynamic between, this period where all the supporting characters get to talk with their supporting characters. Does that make sense? Before they leave off to the big grand finale at the end. I thought it was an interesting way to handle it. And one of the biggest things that I can write home about is when Foggy hands Daredevil his suit, because for the longest time, Foggy's been very standoffish about Matt's alter ego, and he definitely did not support it. But there at the end of episode 7, I believe it is, or maybe the middle, beginning, or whatever it is, he hands Daredevil the suit in the bag and said, "That's what family's for. Go do what you need to do, man." And I was like, wow, man, it's good.
There's a lot of moments in this, a lot of character moments in this that I think that really, I guess particularly in the case of Daredevil, and it makes sense. I mean, this is Marco Ramirez, who was the showrunner on season 2, was an executive producer on season 1. I mean, he's kind of the main guy in charge for this. So it does make sense that Daredevil in particular would get a lot of the focus on the for this particular iteration that we see of Daredevil.
And he's also handled as almost the leader of the group. At one point, this Stick states that, hey, listen, you know what I mean? You need to lead these people. You can't lead them like the Iron Fist can. You're much more of a leader. And so I guess it's appropriate that he gets a major leading role in these group of characters.
Yeah, but I mean, to that moment with Foggy, I mean, like, that's such a very powerful moment, of Foggy kind of accepting. I mean, we've seen Foggy to this point in the Defenders, he's cleaned up a little bit. He's got a nice haircut. He's interacting with Luke Cage. He's working for Hogarth's law firm, and he's kind of separated himself a little bit from Murdoch and Nelson. And it is still refreshing to see that, Foggy does understand Matt. I mean, Matt, for as much as he wants to deny it, he is Daredevil.
That's it.
That's him. And Foggy accepting that and I don't want to say encouraging, but at least saying that, I know this is what you want to do and I support you. Like, it's nice to see that sort of relationship reflected in this show.
And it's contrasted at the end, which was another tearjerker, to where you see how both him and Karen Page are dealing with the conclusion of Matt Murdock's character, or what they think is the conclusion of his character at the end of the season. Because now he kind of feels responsible for Matt's supposed conclusion, because they don't know how his story quite ends.
Yeah, so I guess this is as good a time as any to really kind of to focus on how these arcs of these characters trying to be heroic resolves, and Daredevil, like I said, I think is really the focal point of the show. And basically, by the end of the show, he is quote unquote dead. As far as really any of his characters know, and really as far as any of the Defenders know, and like you're saying with Foggy and Karen, like that was a hugely emotional moment where those two are really just struggling with, we always knew that Matt's obsession or his compulsion to be Daredevil would lead him down a road that would get him killed. But now that we're here, it's, how do we deal with this?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I started getting kind of tugged on my heart deep down emotionally when everybody came back to the precinct, to their supporting characters and their family, if you will. And Karen and Foggy both kept looking to the vacant door. And Matt never walked through the door. And then so I kind of dealt with that, because the way they progress from there is it kind of goes to each individual character and what they're doing after the main event, and you're just still kind of dealing with Matt not coming through the door. Foggy goes to Luke Cage's house, and that's where he tells Claire that he feels responsible because he gave Matt his outfit, to go fight, and he never returned. That whole last 10 minutes, it just kind of made you feel shitty.
Yeah, I mean, because Matt Murdock, Daredevil, I think is the through line of all these shows, and we both agreed that Daredevil was the big show for us across of all these entire Netflix series that really kind of was the one that we liked the most. And so naturally we're going to be most attracted to Daredevil's storyline, and so him being such a major player in this, and for it to be such a personal storyline, as we see with Elektra, like it does strike a chord.
But lo and behold, he's at some church recovering. I don't know how he...
Lo and behold.
Yeah, I don't know how he came out of that tunnel, but he came out of that tunnel somehow.
Yeah, I suppose that's a story for another day. So I guess I kind of want to talk about kind of where all these characters have been left, and kind of what we'll see possibly going forward. So Daredevil has already been announced for season 3, so we kind of know he's not dead, and we see him at the end with, I guess, some sort of church. I don't know exactly where he is, but they call for a Sister Maggie, which I think is particularly relevant because Daredevil, as far as we've known him within the shows, we knew his dad as the boxer battling Jack Murdoch that gets killed because he's trying to do the right thing for his son. But we don't really know a whole lot about his mother. There's a phone conversation, or I guess a phone call, like a voicemail that Jack leaves to her, talking about Matt. So we really haven't seen anything that really kind of grapples with what happened to Matt's mom. And I mean, basically, what we see here directly deals with her. I mean, basically, in the comics at least, and presumably they'll carry this forward to the show, is that, she kind of renounced being a mother of Matt and went into to be a nun.
Oh.
And so potentially in season 3, we might see Matt talking to his mother, which, for a character that is so intrinsic to his beliefs, like that would be an extremely fascinating area to explore.
Does she support him or does she not support him? And
sure, yeah, all that, and not only that, but it very much ties into the Daredevil Born Again graphic novel, which deals with not only Matt struggling with his faith, but Matt struggling with Kingpin uncovering his identity. And as we saw in season 1, Matt Murdock / Daredevil was the one responsible for really putting Wilson Fisk into the precarious position that he's in. And it would be understandable for, let's say, Kingpin to really kind of want revenge for the pains and the struggles and the separation from his love of his life, Vanessa, for him to kind of want some revenge against Daredevil. So I think that what we see in the Defenders at the very end, and we don't really see how Daredevil survives this explosion that we see. I mean, the Midland Circle building gets totally leveled with C4, but Daredevil and by extension possibly and presumably Elektra survived that whole thing.
right.
It would be interesting to explore that. I mean, that's kind of where we see Daredevil leave off, but I'm kind of interested to see your take on how we see Jessica Jones and some of these other characters, kind of not only where they leave off as far as the ending of the Defenders is concerned, but also kind of what you might like to see going forward.
I'd like to see like more of a I don't necessarily need to see Jessica Jones with powers. I'd like to see more of a noir environment for her. You know what I mean? Maybe some sort of big case or just more investigative stuff. I would enjoy that. Center the entire season around her investigative abilities. I think that would be really cool, and I think that's something that we haven't seen from any particular superhero. Like even if you take Batman, for example, Batman's never been portrayed as the master detective. You know what I mean? We've never had a master detective.
Well, not in terms of adaptations to TV and film, certainly.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. I'd like to see a season her doing her shit. That's what I'd like to see. And then as far as Danny Rand goes, I'd like to see him figure his shit out. I'd like to see him do some Iron Fist stuff. More meditation and kicking ass and possibly using both of his fists and maybe getting a fucking costume. All that stuff would be good, right? Get a costume, kick some ass, use both your fists, and just be an Iron Fist. I want to see Iron Fist instead of Danny Rand.
Yeah, and my hope going forward is that Danny really kind of accepts kind of what Daredevil's sacrifice at the end of Defenders really kind of imparts upon him. It kind of seems like he's gotten the impression that, okay, Daredevil was the protector of New York City. And now that he's gone, at least as far as he's aware, maybe I can step into that role.
Right.
And so we kind of see a little bit of a proto Iron Fist costume towards the end. It's not quite what I want. I'm still waiting for that fucking mask, but
I guess if we have Danny Rand in a tracksuit, I'll take it.
Yeah, at least in terms of him kind of embracing his responsibility and trying to be a protector of not only Kunlun but New York. I think that would be a good way to step forward, and I hope that now that he's defeated the Hand. You got to fight the Hand for me, Danny.
Right.
Yeah. Hopefully, now that he's past that, we can get past this angsty, broody bullshit, and really kind of see him be closer to kind of what I wanted him to be from the start. and that is someone that's a little bit more lighthearted, but that someone that is very talented, accepts his responsibilities, and someone that can be useful. And I hope that, if we see a Defenders season 2, he's not the weak link anymore. He's someone that has very much earned his own going forward.
And there's no doubt that Davos is gonna kick ass.
Yeah, we got a hint about that. I mean, we saw Davos talking to Joy Meacham about possibly establishing a partnership, and Davos from the comics is the Steel Serpent, who is the arch enemy of Iron Fist. So I think that's a conflict we'll see going forward with him, and now that Iron Fist season 2, which should be filming in December of this year, 2017, has a new showrunner, Raven Metzner, whose credits aren't particularly anything to write home about, but he's not Scott Buck. So I hope that going forward that they can somewhat reconcile and fix the Iron Fist character going forward. And you kind of skipped over him, but Luke Cage. Luke Cage kind of went back to his status quo. I think in this show, he's back with Claire Temple, kind of having a nice relationship. Sometimes they drink coffee together.
That's it. I was about to say drink some coffee.
And he's very much, Harlem's his home. He's about protecting Harlem and the people itself. And at the end of Luke Cage season 1, we saw some big players kind of step up in the game, and Luke Cage going forward. So I think we'll see those characters colliding once again, and hopefully they can do it a little bit more consistently going forward in Luke Cage. So I'm excited for all these characters going forward. I think there's a lot of potential.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it's just a matter of really exploiting that potential. So, we'll see what happens. I mean, Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are literally filming their seasons 2 now, and Daredevil season 3 will pick up in October, and I think I mentioned Iron Fist is going to be filming in December. So, we're going to see these characters one way or another. I just hope that going forward, they've learned their lessons of things that maybe didn't work in their first iterations, and going forward we can just see nothing but improvements. So maybe that's naive to think, but I hope going forward. I mean, I'm going to watch these things. I'm obviously in the bag for all these things, but I hope that going forward we see a lot of interesting developments for all these characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think Danny Rand's probably got the most room for growth, because he could be so much more than what he is. So hopefully they expand on him in a big way.
All right. I mean, I guess that pretty much covers it for Marvel's The Defenders. Unless you have anything else you want to kind of touch on?
No, I think that's about it, man. I mean, overall, I think it was a decent show with very high points, and if you're vested, watch it. That's my opinion of The Defenders. Have you been up? What have you been up to this week?
It's actually been a pretty momental week for me. I've spent most of my free time editing this podcast, not to get too meta on our listeners, but takes a little bit of time to pare down what we say. I guess if I was going to take the opportunity right now to shout out anything, I kind of feel it's maybe a good time for me to shout out some of the podcasts that I've been listening to that really kind of inspired me to come to you and say, I've been listening to these podcasts. Maybe we should try to get on the game and see what happens. What I've been listening to and what I've listened to for a while now is the Nerdist with Chris Hardwick.
Right.
I really enjoy that. That's kind of what really got me started on a lot of the podcasts. He has conversations with a lot of famous people, and I phrase it as conversations because I think that's kind of what it boils down to. It's not much an interview. It's him. Let's sit down and shoot the shit, even with people he maybe is not so familiar with. And I find that a pretty interesting perspective on a lot of people that, maybe you wouldn't really get to know so well, but it kind of does put you in the same room as them, where
right.
You're kind of just like, okay, I kind of know this person a little bit better. So I find that kind of an interesting perspective. Other than that, other podcasts I typically listen to are Fatman on Batman with Kevin Smith and Mark Bernardin. Kevin Smith, I'm sure you recognize.
Oh, yeah.
Clerks, Chasing Amy, Mallrats, Dogma, all that's good stuff. I'm a big fan of Kevin Smith, and he's a very different kind of podcaster than, say, Chris Hardwick is. he tackles a lot of the same type of stuff that I and you enjoy, and he does it in a way that's pretty irreverent. I guess would probably be the kindest way to say it, but I enjoy his perspective on it. He's often very high for most of his podcasts that he records. But
who is this? Is this the Fat Man?
Yeah, Kevin Smith. Yeah, Kevin Smith. Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, say he's
I've never listened to any of these, so I might have to get into the.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess for our listeners, I mean, podcasting is a format that I was pretty familiar with, which is kind of when I came to Andrew, after we'd always had these conversations, I said, I listen to these podcasts, like I think this is a format that I would really love to get on. And for you, Andrew, I mean, I know it's something that, you never really had a ton of exposure to, but
I do listen to the Giant Bomb. I do enjoy them.
Okay.
So that's, yeah. I think that's probably the only real one that I've listened to.
Okay. Yeah.
But they're a fun group of people to listen to, and that's a video game podcast. But they're like I said, they're fun people to listen to, and it's I just enjoy the banter. I can tell you though, I did take your advice, and I started Mr. Robot last week, and I finished it this week, and incredible show. I was worried on where they could take it for season 2.
Okay, I mean, so how would you compare season 2 to season 1?
Well,
and obviously you've had a bit of separation between watching season 1 to season 2 in the way that I did, but I'm curious to kind of see where you stack them up.
I think season 2 did some cool things where I didn't think there was a lot of cool things to be done. So in that regard, they did a lot. And no, I mean, I think the characters in that show are very compelling. And I would say it ranks right up there with season 1, to be honest. Like I said, I didn't think that they could take it. I didn't think that they could continue down the road that they've already been on. But they did it in a very good way. And I also started Game of Thrones. And I think I watched up to season. I saw up until the Red Wedding, but it was very broken in between how I watched it, so I didn't really get a consistent experience with it. And I'm kind of skeptical to really dive in head first and do it again because I really think that I could probably grind the show out and be very satisfied with it. I'm not one to wait. I like to binge. But there's not a whole lot else to watch right now, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get started on it and see what I think about it, because there's been a lot going on, and you can't avoid the spoilers. They're everywhere online, especially with HBO doing what they're doing. So I figured I'd go ahead and get started on that and see where that leads me.
Yeah, we'll say before long you're going to be stuck in the same boat as the rest of us, waiting on season 8.
That's it.
To really kind of conclude everything. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a show that's well worth the investment into. And not that it doesn't have its own issues here and there, but it's a very satisfying experience overall. So I think you'll find that advancing kind of beyond the point that you were prior to that, I think you'll be rewarded with your viewing experience. So to jump back to kind of what I was talking about, other podcasts, I definitely want to shout out for anyone that has any sort of mild interest in the medium. The Weekly Planet with James Clement, aka Mr. Sunday Movies on YouTube, and Nick Mason. Probably the biggest single influence on me as far as kind of why I wanted to do it. Those guys talk a lot about the same things that I do. Those guys are one of the few podcasts that I will listen to every week just to get their perspective on things, and I greatly enjoy it. And by extension, someone on the Planet Broadcasting Network, along with those guys, is Philly Casuals with Tommy Dasilo, Ben Vernell, and Adam Knox. I listen to those guys on a weekly basis as well for video game insights. I have an intense backlog of video games that I would love to tackle, and I kind of get the impression that those guys are the same way. They're like, "Oh, we got to do a podcast. We'll talk about video games, and I'll play this for like 2 hours." And I kind of feel the same way where those guys are just like, "Ah, fuck, we're trying to do too much right now." And
that's hilarious.
They bring a lot of fun insight to kind of a lot of the games that I play, and some other games that I have heard about but haven't actually had a chance to play. So yeah, shout out to those guys.
I'll have to look into those other podcasts though. I haven't listened to any real podcasters like
and,
that.
And there's podcasts for everything. I mean, those are just the ones that I listen to because those are the ones that interest me. And everyone has their own interests. I mean, you could search anything on iTunes or Google Play or whatever medium you kind of want to look at podcasts on, and you can find anything that really is kind of in your wheelhouse. So for anyone listening, not just you, Andrew, obviously, but just for anyone listening, like, podcasts are an awesome way to really kind of dive into anything you're interested in. Those are just the recommendations I have,
right,
for things that I'm interested in, and some of you might be interested in the same things, so I would recommend you to check out the ones that I mentioned. But really, I mean, anything. I mean, at this point, podcasts are so prevalent. I mean, podcasting in general as a network, I think, is something that a lot of people should perk up their ears and pay attention to. So that's it for me. Andrew, you got anything else you want to talk about?
If you've made it this far, thanks for listening to our opinions of the Defenders, and we look forward to recording next week's episode. We do
indeed. I mean, we look forward to hearing any sort of feedback or commentary that anyone listening that they can provide to us. It definitely motivates us to keep going on. And for anyone that is listening, thank you again.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're not going to hear the end of us saying thank you because that's what keeps us going. So if that bothers you, sorry, but
give us some pointers. Let us know what you want us to talk about.
I mean, that's. Mm-hmm. Moving past that, we got to give credit to Kevin McLeod for our track Mechanolith, our intro and outro track. He is incompetech.com. His track is licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. We're available at www.watchreviewrepeat.com. You can find the links there to everything you'll ever need for us. We got iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Facebook, anything like that. Like, that's all going to be there. Twitter is going to be there. We're at WRR Pod on Twitter. If you want to follow us, send us anything. watchreviewrepeat@gmail.com is our email address. So, not to inundate with you information, but
we're everywhere.
We're everywhere. When I say we want you guys to listen to us any way you possibly can. If you're on iTunes, Google Play, anything like that, leave us a review. Maybe that'll boost us up the charts and get some other listeners into the fold, and that would be cool. All right, Andrew, any last words to
No, everybody have a good night. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, that's just it. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.